Hi, I'm Derek, and welcome to Fun Scale Models. In this video, we'll be showing you on how to do a canopy made from clear, flat sheet. We'll be focusing on building the Park Flyer Corsair canopy, but these techniques can be used on any of these models. You'll need several different tools and glues to be able to create these canopies. One of the first tools you're going to need is a cutting mat. You're going to need a sharp, fresh blade X-Acto. This is a number 11 scalpel blade. A straight ruler. Various different size scissors. You may also need a tweezers. And for the various types of glues, you're going to need Canopy glue. This is the brand and version that I have. And I also apply it in this fine-tipped applicator. If you don't have access to something like this, you can also use a toothpick. You may also need some PVA to glue some material down. You may need a round dowel in various sizes. And of course, spray adhesive. This is Elmer's. This is the spray adhesive that I use. The part number is E451. And you may also need some sealer. This is Krylon Crystal Clear model or part number 1303. So here is the hatch and canopy already ready for covering. So some of the prep work that's been done is, for this particular model, the Corsair, there are some forms that are added to the hatch canopy framing work. This is going to help us when we're attaching the clear canopy parts and are removed later. I've painted the framing interior green, and something a little bit different on this particular model is I've pre-covered this section of the hatch with lightweight domestic tissue. We'll be adding the actual tissue template next. In addition to the tissue template for the hatch, there's also some paper templates for the canopy framing. So you can see here, these are the main front windscreen and main canopy framework. This sheet also has the last piece of the canopy, which is the top center, and this piece here, which is part of the tissue template. We'll show what we're going to do with that next. Before applying the tissue to the hatch, this section needs to be cut out and glued to the back side of the hatch. We're now ready to glue the paper section to the back side of the tissue template for the hatch. Let's go ahead and remove the tissue from its print carrier sheet. This will get glued on just like this, so that you can see it shining through there. This panel line matches up with the forward section of the paper template. Note that the green is on the opposite side of the color of the tissue. Using Elmer's glue stick, We'll let that dry before trimming out the outside exterior of the hatch itself. While that is drying, we'll go ahead and we'll get the canopy framing templates prepared. First will be to cut these out alongside the exterior, including this one here and the front windscreen. So we've cut the canopy templates around the exterior box. We're going to go ahead and use the back side of the X-Acto blade or the scalpel to score along the fold lines. We don't want to cut through, we just want to be able to fold it easier. We'll do the same for the other two panels. So we've folded and unfolded our template. We're now going to spray it with the spray adhesive. A couple of light coats. Now we're going to fold this back together again, being careful not to add any wrinkles. I like to use a popsicle stick or a piece of scrap to sort of burnish it down. And so now you have an interior and an exterior of your template. We'll go ahead and we'll let that dry and complete the same for the others. With the glue dried on the cardstock templates here, we're going to go ahead and do the next step, which is remove the glass sections of the templates. That would be these areas in here. We're going to go ahead and start out with the main canopy template first, and using a couple of tools. The first tool we're going to use is a push pin. And what you'll want to do is in each one of the corners, you're going to go ahead and use the push pin to poke a hole. What that does is it helps to reduce the chance of the X-Acto blade or the knife blade going into a corner more than you want it to. You're basically cutting to that hole. Go ahead and we'll do that next. Next is the top glass panel. This one's a little bit different in that you don't see a whole lot of framing around it, but we'll be keeping this area here. So the section that's cut out is along this outline. The last section to cut out is the main front windscreen. The next step will be to glue these templates on top of clear sheet. This is 3mm sheet. You can also use a report cover. It has to be thin plastic and fairly flexible. We'll use our spray adhesive to spray on the back of this and then attach this over the clear sheet. So we sprayed the back side of our template with the spray adhesive, about the same amount that we used when we were making the gluing the two halves of this together. We have our clear sheet, and we're going to go ahead and attach that. And make sure that you're gently rubbing with something that's not going to scratch the plastic on the backside. We're not adding individual sections to just this little panel. We're putting it on the entire backside. It makes it much easier in trimming up the right size later. We'll go ahead and do this with the other panels and then let it dry thoroughly. The glue has dried the clear plastic to the frames. The next step that we're going to do is something that's somewhat unique to the Corsair, and that's this template and the top panel of the canopy. So we're going to tape the top canopy panel to this piece of paper and use these guidelines to cut in the plastic itself. Go ahead and remove the template. And you can see where the lines have cut. Next step will be to trim around the glass section. So for here, we're going to trim the glass, this line of the red and the glass again. Next is the front windscreen. We're going to use a couple different tools for that. First is going to be a sharp scissors. And I like to do the curved sections first. The last section is the main canopy. So we're ready to start adding the canopy frame panels to the hatch and the framework itself. Here we have sealed the tissue with the Krylon Crystal Clear and shrunk it. Again, we've pre-painted all the main framing that we can. The top section will go in, again, in sections glued to these parts. There's no glue that goes along here. To help get it prepared to meet the curvature of the frame itself, we're going to roll it around a round surface. So you can see here, I'm just rolling it around a curved tube. You'll also want to change the diameter, and as you go, reduce the diameter of the tube that you're forming it around. With that formed, the next step will be we're going to glue this panel on just like this. So there's going to be glue along these edges and here, but again, not here. I'm going to go ahead and use our canopy glue with the fine tip applicator. Now, one of the things I've found out is it doesn't take that long for the canopy glue to tack up. So what you'll want to do is, I recommend just holding it for the time being until it tacks up, and then once it's firm enough, you can go ahead and set it aside. You'll want to let it thoroughly dry, and you're going to do each one of these sections in turn. Go ahead and kind of look at, so it's about right there. If you don't have a fine tip applicator, that's okay. Like I said, you can use a toothpick. That also works just fine. I'm not putting a ton on there. We want to make sure that it is all the way. And then We'll go ahead and we'll hold that in place for a few moments, let it tack up before we move on to the next one. Again, if you get a little bit of glue on another section, you can go ahead and gently wipe it away. It's also not the end of the world. So we've trimmed the overhang here, and now we've applied the glue, and we've wrapped around the next panel. We'll want to make sure as best we can to try and kind of keep the same curvature as we did when we established this panel. We'll go ahead and let that dry. All right, so this panel is dry. One thing that I was doing while sort of testing a dry fit, if you will, I noticed that when this next panel is contoured, it overlaps a little bit more on this end. So I'm going to trim just a slight amount off this end right here for each one. Before I do that, I'm going to trim the overhang here. All right, so this section is dry. We'll go ahead and we'll trim off the overhang. And this is where having a very sharp blade is helpful. We just have this last section to trim off. So this does wrap around and is glued to this section here, which is C1, and it's also glued here. As you can tell, this also has a slight overlap. So I'm going to do a little bit of trimming on this so that there's less overhang. That's pretty close. Let's go ahead and add the glue. So we're going to add the glue in here. And we'll go ahead and we'll hold that. It only does take about 3 or 4 minutes for it to tack up enough where you don't need to keep the constant pressure on it. We'll hold that in place and then let it dry completely. All right, so this final section has dried and been trimmed along this part line here. The next step will be adding the main canopy framing. We're going to do it in 2 different halves. We're going to glue on this side first, and then we'll glue on this side. When we do, we're going to glue it about halfway onto this former here, and then even with the framing. It will overhang slightly, and that's as designed. Before we glue that on, though, we are going to want to put a slight curve to this section as it does wrap around the canopy framing itself. So we're going to go ahead and again use a round dowel to sort of pre-curve this section. And then again, a slightly smaller diameter. And then we're going to use glue along the framing. Go ahead and let that dry. With this side glued down, it's time to do the same for this one. Now what we're doing is matching the top line of this with that post, as well as going about halfway onto this former here. We want to leave some of this edge for the front windscreen, which will eventually be added next. Right now you can see there's a bit of a gap between the top of this surface and this surface. What we'll do later is trim along this line and overlap so that it is even with it. So we have both sides glued and dried. This section here, as you can see, sticks up a little bit above the template here. This should be resting on top of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut along this line. We're going to glue this side down and then overlap this one. We'll let that dry and we'll glue the other side down over the top of it. All right, so we've finished gluing this section down. The last bit to do is to attach the front windscreen. There are tick marks on both the tissue template and the paper template, and it wraps around and is flush with the front of this panel here. We'll go ahead and add the glue and attach it. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll let that dry. And this is the completed canopy. The last step left to do is to remove the form pieces in here. First, we'll cut through this section here and this section here of the light ply, and then cut out this section as well, and take out these two pieces.